The janitor's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Step away from him, now." And Marcus Whitfield, heir to the Whitfield Pharmaceutical empire, stopped breathing altogether. Detective Sarah Chen would replay that moment in her mind countless times over the following months, analyzing every detail, every gesture, every word that had been spoken in those crucial seconds. She had been standing barely 10 feet away when it happened, champagne flute in hand, watching the elaborate charity auction unfold in the grand ballroom of the Whitfield estate. What she witnessed that night would ultimately expose a conspiracy so intricate, so carefully orchestrated, that it would shake the foundations of Chicago's most powerful family. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The evening had begun like any other high society fundraiser. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the assembled crowd of Chicago's elite, gathered to support the Children's Medical Research Foundation. The irony of that charity choice would become apparent much later. Thomas Whitfield, the pharmaceutical magnate, had spared no expense for the annual event at his Lake Forest mansion. Servers in pristine white uniforms moved silently between guests, offering perfectly chilled champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvre prepared by the city's most renowned catering team. Detective Sarah Chen wasn't supposed to be there. Her presence at such an exclusive gathering was purely coincidental, a last-minute invitation extended by her college roommate Jennifer Martinez, who now worked as Whitfield Pharmaceuticals' head of public relations. Jennifer had insisted that Sarah needed to get out more, to experience something beyond crime scenes and interrogation rooms. The detective had reluctantly agreed, trading her usual practical attire for an elegant black dress that felt foreign against her skin. The Whitfield mansion was a testament to old money and refined taste. Imported marble floors reflected the light from antique fixtures, while priceless artwork adorned walls that had witnessed generations of Chicago's most influential families. The main ballroom, where the auction was taking place, featured floor-to-ceiling windows that offered stunning views of Lake Michigan. Everything about the setting spoke of permanence, of a family whose influence had been carefully cultivated over decades. Marcus Whitfield commanded attention wherever he went. At 28, he possessed the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money, never having to question his place in the world. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his tuxedo impeccably tailored, and his smile practiced to perfection. As the only son of Thomas Whitfield, Marcus was being groomed to take over the family business, a responsibility he seemed to embrace with enthusiasm. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, charming potential donors and business associates with equal skill. Sarah had been observing him throughout the evening, not out of any professional interest initially, but simply because he was impossible to ignore. There was something about Marcus that drew people to him, a magnetic quality that made others lean in when he spoke, laugh a little too loudly at his jokes, compete for his attention. She watched as he effortlessly transitioned from discussing pharmaceutical patents with elderly board members to flirting with socialites young enough to be their daughters. The auction itself was proceeding smoothly. A professional auctioneer had been hired for the event, his melodious voice carrying across the ballroom as he guided bidding on various luxury items donated by local businesses and wealthy patrons. A week in Tuscany, a vintage wine collection, original artwork by promising local artists, all were finding eager buyers among the assembled crowd. The atmosphere was festive, with the gentle clink of glassware and murmured conversations providing a sophisticated soundtrack to the proceedings. Thomas Whitfield stood near the makeshift stage, beaming with pride as the evening's donations steadily climbed toward their ambitious goal. At 62, he retained the sharp intelligence and commanding presence that had built his pharmaceutical empire from a small family business into a multinational corporation. His wife, Catherine, gracefully worked the room beside him, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her manner warm but regal. They were the picture of philanthropic success, a couple whose wealth enabled them to make a real difference in the world. It was during the bidding for a luxury spa weekend that Sarah first noticed the janitor. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with graying hair and the weathered hands of someone who had spent decades working with them. Unlike the other staff members, who moved with professional efficiency but remained largely invisible to the guests, this man seemed to be paying attention to everything happening around him. His eyes moved constantly, taking in conversations, watching interactions, studying faces with an intensity that struck Sarah as unusual for someone in his position. The detective in her automatically cataloged details about him. His uniform was clean, but showed signs of long use, the fabric slightly faded in places where harsh cleaning chemicals had taken their toll. His posture was straight despite his age, suggesting either military service or perhaps athletics in his younger years. Most intriguingly, when he thought no one was watching, his expression was far too alert, too calculating for someone simply going about routine maintenance duties. Marcus had just successfully bid on a sailing excursion when the evening took its first unexpected turn. He was celebrating with a small group of friends, raising his champagne flute in a mock toast, when he suddenly began coughing violently. At first, the guests around him chuckled, assuming he had simply swallowed wrong or perhaps the champagne had gone down the wrong way. But the coughing quickly intensified, and Marcus's face began to redden with distress. The crowd's amusement turned to concern as Marcus doubled over, his hands clutching his throat. His breathing became labored, then stopped altogether. The champagne flute fell from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent ballroom. His face was turning from red to purple, his eyes wide with panic as he fought for air that wouldn't come. Chaos erupted around him. Someone screamed. Others rushed forward, forming a tight circle around the choking man. Voices rose in panic, suggestions flying from all directions. Thomas Whitfield pushed through the crowd toward his son, his face a mask of terror. Catherine Whitfield stood frozen, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other reaching helplessly toward her child. It was in that moment of absolute pandemonium that the janitor appeared. He moved through the crowd with surprising authority, his voice cutting through the noise with calm command. People instinctively stepped aside for him, perhaps responding to something in his tone that suggested competence, experience, the voice of someone who knew what to do when others didn't. Sarah watched, mesmerized, as the older man knelt behind Marcus with practiced efficiency. His movements were precise, confident, nothing like the hesitation one might expect from a building maintenance worker suddenly thrust into a medical emergency. He positioned himself carefully, wrapping his arms around Marcus from behind, his hands finding exactly the right spot just below the ribcage. The first abdominal thrust was powerful, controlled. Marcus's body jerked with the force of it, but nothing happened. The janitor didn't pause, didn't second-guess himself. He delivered another thrust, and another, each one perfectly executed with the kind of technique that spoke of extensive training. The crowd held its collective breath, watching in tense silence as this unlikely hero worked to save the pharmaceutical heir's life. On the fourth thrust, something dislodged. A piece of food, later identified as part of a bacon-wrapped scallop, flew from Marcus's mouth and skittered across the marble floor. Marcus gasped, his lungs filling with precious air, his color slowly beginning to return to normal. The janitor held him steady as he coughed and wheezed, ensuring he remained upright and could breathe freely. The relief in the room was palpable. Applause broke out, scattered at first, then building to enthusiastic appreciation for the janitor's quick thinking and skill. Thomas Whitfield reached his son just as Marcus was beginning to speak again, his voice hoarse but functional. Father embraced son with obvious relief, tears streaming down the older man's face. But Sarah was watching the janitor, and what she saw troubled her. Instead of basking in the gratitude and praise being showered upon him, the man seemed almost uncomfortable with the attention. He stepped back from the scene as quickly as possible, deflecting thanks and attempting to blend back into the background. Most people would have expected him to remain, to accept the accolades, perhaps even to be formally recognized by the family he had just saved. Instead, he was trying to disappear. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the family physician who had been among the evening's guests, arrived to check on Marcus. She pronounced him stable, though shaken, and recommended he rest quietly for the remainder of the evening. As Marcus was helped to a nearby chair, accepting water and gentle attention from concerned friends, Sarah found herself studying the dispersing crowd, looking for the janitor who had saved his life. She spotted him near the service entrance, speaking quietly with another staff member. Even from a distance, she could see the intensity of their conversation, the way both men glanced repeatedly toward Marcus and his family. There was something about their body language that triggered every investigative instinct she possessed. It wasn't relief or satisfaction at a job well done. It was something else entirely, something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Jennifer Martinez appeared at her elbow, champagne flute trembling slightly in her hand. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The public relations executive was clearly shaken by what had just occurred. Her face was pale, and she kept glancing toward Marcus, as if expecting him to start choking again at any moment. "That was terrifying," Jennifer whispered, her voice barely audible above the gradually returning conversation in the ballroom. "Thank God that Janitor knew what to do. Marcus could have died right here in front of everyone." Sarah nodded absently, still watching the service entrance where the janitor had been standing. He was gone now, vanished as efficiently as he had appeared during the crisis. The other staff member was also nowhere to be seen, leaving her with more questions than answers about what she had witnessed. "Jennifer," she said carefully, "how long has that janitor worked for the Whitfields?" Her friend looked puzzled by the question. "Which one?" "There are several maintenance staff members who work the estate. The older man, gray hair, maybe 60. He's the one who saved Marcus." Jennifer frowned, considering. "I'm not sure. I don't really pay attention to the cleaning staff, you know. They're just sort of there, background." She paused, then added with a laugh, "Though I guess I'll be paying more attention from now on. Who knows when you might need someone with those kinds of skills?" The comment was meant to be lighthearted, but it only deepened Sarah's unease. Jennifer was right that most people didn't pay attention to service staff, which would make them perfect for what? She shook her head, trying to dismiss the paranoid thoughts that were beginning to form. This was a charity event, not a crime scene. Sometimes a heroic janitor was just a heroic janitor. But her years in law enforcement had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming that something was very wrong with what she had just witnessed. The evening continued around them, though the mood had shifted noticeably. The auction resumed, but the earlier festive atmosphere had been replaced by a more subdued energy. Conversations were quieter, laughter more restrained. Several guests had already begun making their excuses and departing, clearly unsettled by the close call they had witnessed. Marcus himself seemed to be recovering well. He had insisted on remaining at the event despite his father's concerns, though he appeared content to stay seated and accept the stream of well-wishers who approached to check on his condition. He was handling the attention with his usual charm, making light of the incident and praising the quick thinking of the maintenance worker who had saved his life. Sarah noticed, however, that he kept touching his throat, as if reassuring himself that he could still breathe freely. There was also a slight tremor in his hands that he was trying to hide, the lingering effects of what had clearly been a traumatic experience. Despite his bravado, Marcus Whitfield had been genuinely frightened, possibly for the first time in his privileged life. Thomas Whitfield had made several attempts to locate the janitor who had saved his son, apparently wanting to thank him personally and perhaps offer some kind of reward. Each inquiry, however, seemed to hit a dead end. The catering company claimed no knowledge of an older maintenance worker among their staff. The estate's regular cleaning service insisted they had only sent their usual team, none of whom matched the description of Marcus's rescuer. Sarah found this increasingly strange. In her experience, heroes didn't usually vanish without a trace, especially when substantial rewards were likely to be offered. The man's reluctance to accept praise or recognition was unusual enough, but his apparent ability to simply disappear from an event where everyone's identity should have been accounted for was deeply suspicious. She decided to do some investigating of her own. Excusing herself from Jennifer's company, Sarah made her way toward the service areas of the mansion, following the path she had seen the mysterious janitor take after the incident. The contrast between the public areas and the working spaces of the estate was stark. Gone were the marble floors and crystal chandeliers, replaced by practical tile and fluorescent lighting. The kitchen was bustling with activity as the catering staff worked to serve dinner and clean up from the cocktail hour. Sarah approached the supervisor, a harried-looking woman in her 50s who was directing traffic with the efficiency of a traffic controller. "Excuse me," Sarah said, showing her badge discreetly. "I'm Detective Chen with Chicago PD. I need to ask about one of your staff members." The supervisor's expression immediately became wary. "Is there a problem, Detective?" "Not at all. Actually, one of your people just saved someone's life. I'm trying to locate him to make sure he gets proper recognition." Relief flooded the woman's face. "Oh, you must mean the Heimlich maneuver thing in the ballroom." "Yes, several of my people mentioned it." "Quite dramatic from what I heard." "The man who performed the procedure, older gentleman, gray hair, is he one of your regular staff?" The supervisor looked genuinely confused. "Detective, I've been running events like this for 15 years. I personally know every member of my staff, and I can guarantee that none of them fit that description. We have 3 male servers tonight, all under 30, and no maintenance personnel at all. The Whitfields handle their own cleaning staff." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Are you absolutely certain?" "Positive. If there was someone here who didn't belong to my team, they weren't supposed to be here at all." The implications of this revelation were staggering. If the janitor didn't work for the catering company, and the Whitfields couldn't locate him among their regular staff, then who was he? How had he gained access to such an exclusive event? And most importantly, why had he been there at all? Sarah thanked the supervisor and continued her investigation, seeking out members of the estate's permanent staff. The head butler, a distinguished man named Roberts who had worked for the family for over 20 years, was equally puzzled by her questions. "I'm afraid there must be some mistake, Detective," he said in his cultured accent. "Our maintenance staff consists of 3 individuals, all of whom I know personally. None of them were scheduled to work this evening, and certainly none match the description you've provided. Is it possible someone could have entered the estate without authorization?" Roberts looked almost offended by the suggestion. "Our security measures are quite comprehensive, particularly during events of this magnitude. Every staff member, guest, and vendor is accounted for. No one enters these grounds without proper clearance. Yet someone clearly had. Someone who had been prepared to save Marcus Whitfield's life, using techniques that suggested medical or emergency response training. Someone who had then vanished as efficiently as he had appeared, leaving behind only questions and a growing sense of unease. Sarah returned to the ballroom, her mind racing with possibilities. Was the choking incident truly accidental, or had it been orchestrated somehow? If so, was the mysterious janitor a good Samaritan who happened to be in the right place at the right time? Or was he part of something larger and more sinister? The detective in her was beginning to construct theories, each more disturbing than the last. The timing of everything seemed too convenient, too perfect. A pharmaceutical heir chokes at his family's charity event, only to be saved by a man who may not even exist in any official capacity, a man whose training and skill level seemed far beyond what his supposed position would require. As the evening wound down and guests began departing in earnest, Sarah found herself studying the Whitfield family with new eyes. Thomas and Catherine maintained their gracious host personas, but she could see the strain beneath their polished exteriors. The evening's events had clearly shaken them, despite Marcus's apparent recovery. Marcus himself was finally showing signs of fatigue. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the aftermath of his choking incident was wearing off, leaving him pale and drawn. He was still accepting congratulations and expressions of concern, but his responses were becoming more automatic, less engaged. It was nearly midnight when Sarah finally decided to leave. She had learned nothing more about the mysterious janitor, despite her informal investigation. If anything, the man's identity had become more puzzling with each person she questioned. He had appeared when needed, performed his crucial task with expert precision, and then vanished like smoke. As she waited for her car to be brought around by the valet service, Sarah noticed movement in the shadows near the estate's service entrance. A figure emerged briefly from the darkness, too distant to identify clearly, before disappearing again into the night. It could have been anyone, or no one at all, just her paranoid imagination playing tricks in the dim light. But as she drove home through the quiet streets of Lake Forest, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had witnessed the opening act of something much larger and more dangerous than a simple choking incident. The mysterious janitor had saved Marcus Whitfield's life, but Sarah was beginning to suspect that salvation might have come at a price that none of them yet understood. The next morning brought no answers, only more questions. Sarah had spent a restless night turning over the evening's events in her mind, analyzing every detail, every interaction, every moment that had seemed off or unusual. By the time she arrived at the precinct, she had convinced herself that her suspicions were warranted, even if she couldn't yet articulate exactly what those suspicions were. Her partner, Detective Mike Rodriguez, was already at his desk when she walked in, nursing his usual large coffee and scrolling through overnight incident reports. He looked up as she approached, immediately noticing her troubled expression. "Rough night at the fancy party?" he asked with a grin. "Did you have to use the wrong fork for your salad?" "Actually, yes, it was a rough night," Sarah replied seriously, ignoring his good-natured ribbing. "Mike, I think I witnessed something last night that we need to look into." Rodriguez's expression sobered as he recognized the tone in her voice. They had been partners for 5 years, long enough for him to know when Sarah's instincts were telling her something important. "What kind of something?" he asked, setting down his coffee and giving her his full attention. Sarah recounted the events of the previous evening, emphasizing the mysterious janitor's appearance and disappearance, his expert handling of the medical emergency, and the subsequent inability of anyone to identify who he was or how he had gained access to the event. "So let me get this straight," Rodriguez said when she finished. "A guy saves someone's life and then doesn't stick around for the reward or recognition. And your theory is that this somehow makes him suspicious?" "Mike, no one could identify him. The catering company, the estate staff, security. Nobody had any record of this man being authorized to be there. Yet somehow he was not only present, but positioned to respond instantly when Marcus Whitfield started choking. Maybe he was a guest who just happened to know first aid? In a janitor's uniform? At a $1,000 a plate charity event?" Rodriguez frowned, beginning to see her point. "Okay, that is a little odd, but what are you suggesting? That someone orchestrated the whole thing?" "I don't know what I'm suggesting yet, but I think we should at least make some inquiries. See if there have been any other incidents involving the Whitfield family. Maybe check if there are any ongoing investigations we should know about." Her partner nodded slowly. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt to ask a few questions. But Sarah, you know how sensitive these things can get when wealthy families are involved. We'd better be very sure we have something concrete before we start poking around." Sarah understood his caution. The Whitfields were not just wealthy. They were politically connected, socially prominent, and capable of making life very difficult for police officers who overstep their bounds. Any investigation involving them would need to be handled with extreme care and substantial justification. But as she sat at her desk, staring at the notes she had made about the previous evening's events, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus Whitfield's life had been saved for a reason that had nothing to do with altruism or good fortune. The mysterious janitor had appeared at exactly the right moment with exactly the right skills, and then vanished without a trace. In her experience, coincidences like that were rarely coincidental at all. The morning passed quietly as Sarah made discreet inquiries into the Whitfield family's recent activities. She checked police databases for any reports involving them, searched for civil lawsuits or regulatory actions against their pharmaceutical company, and even looked into their social media presence for anything that might suggest tensions or threats. What she found was unremarkable to the point of being suspicious in itself. The Whitfields appeared to live charmed lives, free from the kind of problems that usually attracted police attention. Thomas Whitfield's business dealings were apparently above board, his family life stable and happy, his public image that of a generous philanthropist and respected businessman. It was almost too perfect, Sarah thought. In her experience, everyone had something to hide, some skeleton in their closet or dark secret they preferred to keep private. The complete absence of any negative information about the Whitfields made her wonder what kind of resources they might be using to maintain such a pristine public image. Around noon, Rodriguez returned from a meeting with their lieutenant, his expression grim. "We've got a problem," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "I mentioned our interest in the Whitfield situation to Lieutenant Morrison just to cover our bases. She immediately wanted to know why we were looking into a prominent family without any official complaint or evidence of wrongdoing. What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you had some concerns about an incident at a charity event." She was not impressed. Sarah felt her heart sink. She shut us down? Not exactly. But she made it very clear that we're walking on thin ice. Any further investigation will need to be officially sanctioned and based on concrete evidence, not just suspicious feelings. It was frustrating but not unexpected. Police departments were inherently cautious when dealing with wealthy and powerful citizens, and rightfully so. Too many careers had been ended by officers who had pursued investigations against prominent individuals without sufficient cause or evidence. But Sarah's instincts were still screaming that something was wrong, that the events she had witnessed the night before were part of something larger and more dangerous. The question was how to proceed without official backing, and whether she was prepared to risk her career on what might ultimately prove to be nothing more than an overactive imagination. The answer to that question would come sooner than she expected. As she was preparing to leave for the day, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, and the voice on the other end was electronically distorted, clearly disguised. Detective Chen. Yes, who is this? Someone who knows the truth about what happened last night at the Whitfield estate. If you want answers about the janitor who saved Marcus Whitfield's life, meet me at Millennium Park tomorrow at noon. Come alone, and come prepared to learn something that will change everything you think you know about that family. The line went dead before Sarah could respond, leaving her staring at her phone with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Someone else knew about the mysterious janitor. Someone who claimed to have answers to the questions that had been plaguing her all day. The intelligent thing to do would be to report the call to her superiors, to follow proper protocol and involve backup. But Sarah knew that would likely mean the end of any investigation. Her lieutenant had already made it clear that pursuing the Whitfields without concrete evidence was career suicide. As she drove home that evening, Sarah found herself at a crossroads. She could let the matter drop, file away her suspicions as nothing more than an overactive imagination, and return to the routine investigations that filled her days. Or she could meet with this mysterious caller, risk her career and possibly her safety, in pursuit of answers to questions she wasn't even supposed to be asking. The decision, she realized, had already been made. Her instincts had never failed her before, and they were telling her that Marcus Whitfield's brush with death was only the beginning of something much larger and more dangerous than anyone yet realized. Tomorrow at noon, she would be at Millennium Park, ready to learn the truth about the janitor who had appeared from nowhere to save a millionaire's son, and then vanished like a ghost into the Chicago night. The meeting at Millennium Park would forever alter Detective Sarah Chen's understanding of justice, deception, and the lengths to which desperate people would go to protect their secrets. She arrived 15 minutes early, positioning herself near the Crown Fountain with a clear view of the surrounding area. The October air carried the crisp promise of winter, and fallen leaves crunched beneath the feet of joggers and tourists moving through the park. At exactly noon, a woman approached her. She was perhaps 45, professionally dressed in a charcoal gray suit, with auburn hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her appearance was unremarkable except for her eyes, which held the kind of wariness that Sarah recognized in victims and witnesses who had seen too much. "Detective Chen?" the woman asked, her voice no longer disguised but carrying a slight accent that Sarah couldn't immediately place. "Yes. And you are?" "My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez. Until 3 days ago, I was the head of clinical research at Whitfield Pharmaceuticals." She paused, scanning the area nervously. "The man you're looking for, the janitor who saved Marcus Whitfield's life. His name is Viktor Petrov, and he's not a janitor at all." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "What is he?" "A former Soviet intelligence operative. More specifically, he's a man who spent 30 years perfecting the art of eliminating people in ways that appear completely natural. Heart attacks, strokes, choking incidents, allergic reactions. Viktor is an expert in what the intelligence community calls natural cause assassinations." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Are you saying he tried to kill Marcus?" Dr. Vasquez shook her head grimly. "Quite the opposite. Viktor saved Marcus's life because someone else was trying to kill him, someone who had already succeeded in murdering 2 other people, and who would have claimed Marcus as their 3rd victim if Viktor hadn't intervened." They began walking along the park's winding paths as Dr. Vasquez told her story. 3 months ago, she explained, she had begun noticing irregularities in clinical trial data for Whitfield Pharmaceuticals' newest drug, a revolutionary treatment for childhood leukemia called Luminex. The trials showed remarkable success rates, but when Dr. Vasquez attempted to verify the data independently, she discovered that several of the patients who had supposedly recovered completely had actually died. The deaths were being covered up, she said, her voice tight with emotion. falsified records, bribed officials, intimidated families. Luminex wasn't the miracle cure the company claimed. In fact, it was potentially lethal, especially for children with compromised immune systems. Why would they hide that? Wouldn't failed trials just mean more research was needed? Because Whitfield Pharmaceuticals is on the verge of bankruptcy, Dr. Vasquez replied. Thomas Whitfield has been using company funds to maintain his lavish lifestyle for years. The only thing keeping them afloat is a massive pre-order for Luminex from several international health organizations. If the drug fails FDA approval, the company collapses and takes billions in investor money with it. Sarah was beginning to understand the scope of what she was hearing. So Thomas Whitfield has been covering up the deaths to keep the drug on track for approval. Not Thomas, Dr. Vasquez said quietly. Marcus. The revelation stopped Sarah in her tracks. Marcus knew about this? Marcus orchestrated it. His father has been suffering from early-stage dementia for the past year, though the family has kept it secret. Marcus has been running the company behind the scenes, making all the crucial decisions. When the Luminex trials started showing problems, it was Marcus who decided to forge the data rather than admit failure. Dr. Vasquez went on to explain that she had discovered the cover-up by accident while reviewing files for a completely different project. When she confronted Marcus about the discrepancies, he had initially tried to convince her that she was mistaken. When that failed, he offered her a substantial bribe to stay quiet. When she refused, the threats began. He made it clear that my career would be over if I spoke out, that I would never work in pharmaceutical research again. But it was worse than that. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. 2 other researchers who had been asking questions about Luminex died within weeks of each other. Dr. James Morrison had a sudden heart attack while jogging. Dr. Linda Kim choked to death in a restaurant, surrounded by people who couldn't help her. The parallel to Marcus's own choking incident was impossible to ignore. You think these deaths were murders? I know they were. And I know who killed them. Catherine Whitfield. Sarah stopped walking entirely. Marcus's mother? Dr. Vasquez nodded grimly. Catherine Whitfield isn't the elegant socialite she appears to be. Before marrying Thomas 30 years ago, her name was Katerina Volkov, and she was a highly trained operative for Soviet intelligence. She met Thomas during a business trip to Moscow in the early 1990s, seduced him, and eventually convinced him to marry her and bring her to America. The story was becoming more incredible by the moment, but Dr. Vasquez's tone suggested she believed every word she was saying. You're telling me that Marcus's mother is a Russian spy? Former spy, but yes, she's been using her skills to eliminate anyone who threatens her family's secret. Dr. Morrison's heart attack was induced by an injection of potassium chloride that would be undetectable in a standard autopsy. Dr. Kim was fed a piece of food that had been treated with a substance that caused her throat muscles to spasm and seal shut. And Viktor Petrov? Catherine's former handler in Soviet intelligence. He's been tracking her activities for years, trying to gather evidence of her crimes. He knew she would target Marcus next, not to kill him, but to make it appear that he was also a victim of the mysterious deaths plaguing Whitfield Pharmaceuticals. A dying son would generate enormous sympathy and deflect suspicion from the family. Sarah's mind was reeling as she tried to process the implications of what she was hearing. So Catherine was planning to kill her own son? Not kill him, just make it appear that someone was trying to kill him. The plan was for Marcus to nearly choke at the charity event, then be saved at the last moment by a server or guest with medical training. It would look like the same person who killed the 2 researchers had now targeted the Whitfield heir, making the family appear to be victims rather than perpetrators. But Victor intervened. Victor has been working undercover at the estate for weeks, posing as a janitor to gather evidence against Catherine. When he realized what she was planning, he couldn't stand by and watch, even if it meant blowing his cover. He saved Marcus's life, but he also revealed his presence to Catherine. Now she knows he's closing in on her. Dr. Vasquez reached into her purse and withdrew a thick manila envelope. This contains copies of all the evidence I've gathered about the Luminex cover-up. Patient files, financial records, correspondence between Marcus and the investigators who are now dead. I'm giving it to you because I can't go to the FBI myself. Why not? Because Catherine Whitfield has been threatening my daughter, my 8-year-old daughter who attends a private school in Lincoln Park. The message was very clear. If I make any of this public, if I contact law enforcement, my child will become another victim of a tragic accident. Sarah took the envelope, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with it. "Where is Victor now?" "I don't know. He's gone underground since the charity event. But Catherine is looking for him, and when she finds him—" Dr. Vasquez's voice trailed off, the implication clear. "Dr. Vasquez, I need you to come with me to the station. We need to make this official." The woman shook her head sadly. "I can't. I've told you everything I know, given you all the evidence I have. But I won't risk my daughter's life. We're leaving Chicago today, relocating somewhere Catherine Whitfield can't find us. If you run, she wins. The cover-up continues. More children die from a dangerous drug, and the people responsible never face justice. And if I stay, my daughter dies," Dr. Vasquez replied firmly. "I'm sorry, Detective. I've done all I can do. The rest is up to you." She turned and walked away before Sarah could respond, disappearing into the crowd of park visitors. Sarah stood alone, holding the envelope that contained evidence of multiple murders, corporate fraud, and an international conspiracy involving Soviet intelligence operatives. It was the kind of case that could define her career or destroy it entirely. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment, reviewing the contents of Dr. Vasquez's envelope. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. Patient files showed clear patterns of adverse reactions to Luminex that had been systematically covered up. Financial records revealed that Whitfield Pharmaceuticals was indeed on the verge of bankruptcy, surviving only on advance payments for a drug that was likely to fail FDA approval. Most disturbing were the correspondence files between Marcus Whitfield and various officials involved in the clinical trials. The messages were carefully worded but clearly showed a pattern of bribery, intimidation, and evidence tampering. Marcus hadn't just known about the cover-up. He had orchestrated every detail of it. Sarah also found background information on Catherine Whitfield that painted a very different picture from the elegant socialite the public knew. Born Katerina Volkov in Leningrad in 1962, she had been recruited by Soviet intelligence at age 18 and trained in what the files described as wet work, assassinations designed to appear accidental or natural. Her marriage to Thomas Whitfield in 1995 had been flagged by U.S. intelligence agencies as potentially suspicious, but the end of the Cold War had made such concerns seem less urgent. Catherine had successfully integrated into American society, becoming a respected member of Chicago's social elite while apparently leaving her lethal past behind. The files on Viktor Petrov were even more fascinating. A former colonel in Soviet military intelligence, he had specialized in hunting down rogue operatives who had defected or gone freelance after the collapse of the USSR. His pursuit of Catherine Whitfield was apparently part of a larger effort to locate and neutralize former Soviet agents who were using their training for personal gain rather than state purposes. According to Dr. Vasquez's notes, Victor had been tracking Catherine for nearly 5 years, gathering evidence of her involvement in at least a dozen suspicious deaths across 3 countries. The Whitfield case represented his best opportunity to finally bring her to justice, but it had also put him in extreme personal danger. Sarah spent most of the night wrestling with her options. The evidence in the envelope was compelling, but it had been obtained through unofficial channels by people who might themselves be criminals. Dr. Vasquez had fled rather than testify officially. Viktor Petrov was a foreign intelligence operative working without authorization on American soil. Any case built on this foundation would be vulnerable to challenges about evidence collection, witness credibility, and jurisdictional authority. A good defense attorney could probably get most of it thrown out before it ever reached a jury. But if even half of what she had read was true, Catherine and Marcus Whitfield were responsible for multiple deaths and were planning to unleash a dangerous drug on children around the world. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Sarah arrived at the precinct to find Detective Rodriguez waiting for her with a grim expression and a copy of the Chicago Tribune. "You need to see this," he said, handing her the newspaper. The headline read, "Pharmaceutical heiress dies in tragic accident." Below it was a photo of Marcus Whitfield, but not as Sarah remembered him from the charity event. This Marcus looked younger, healthier, smiling broadly as he stood next to a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes. The article described how Rebecca Martinez, Marcus Whitfield's fiancée, and a pediatric oncologist at Children's Memorial Hospital, had died in a car accident the previous evening. Her vehicle had apparently skidded on wet pavement and struck a concrete barrier on Lakeshore Drive. She had been pronounced dead at the scene. Mike, when did this happen? According to the report, around 10 p.m. last night. Single car accident, no witnesses, appears to be weather-related. Rodriguez paused. Sarah, there's something else. I did some checking after our conversation yesterday. Rebecca Martinez had been asking questions about Luminex clinical trials. Apparently, she was concerned about some of the pediatric patients she'd been referred for the study. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Rebecca Martinez had been asking questions about Luminex, just like the two researchers who had died before her. Now she was dead too, and once again, the death appeared to be completely accidental. We need to talk to Marcus Whitfield, Sarah said. If his fiancée was murdered because of what she knew about Luminex, he's either involved or he's in serious danger himself. Rodriguez nodded. I already called the Whitfield estate. Marcus is reportedly devastated by Rebecca's death and isn't seeing anyone. But Thomas Whitfield agreed to meet with us this afternoon. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the Whitfield mansion. As Sarah drove through the gates of the estate for the second time in 3 days, she couldn't help but notice how different everything looked in daylight. The grandeur was still impressive, but there was something almost oppressive about the high walls and elaborate security measures that she hadn't noticed during the charity event. Thomas Whitfield met them in his study, a book-lined room that managed to be both intimate and imposing. At 62, he was still a handsome man, but Sarah could see signs of the stress and illness that Dr. Vasquez had mentioned. His hands trembled slightly as he poured coffee for his guests, and there were moments when his eyes seemed to lose focus entirely. Detectives, I apologize for the circumstances of our meeting, he said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine grief. Rebecca was like a daughter to Catherine and me. Her death has been devastating for the entire family. Mr. Whitfield, we're investigating some irregularities related to your company's clinical trials, Sarah began carefully. We have reason to believe that Dr. Martinez may have been asking questions about the Luminex program before her death. Thomas looked genuinely puzzled. Luminex is our most promising drug in decades. It's going to save thousands of children's lives. I can't imagine why Rebecca would have concerns about it. Sir, are you personally involved in the day-to-day operations of Whitfield Pharmaceuticals? Rodriguez asked. Of course I am. I built this company from nothing. Every major decision goes through me. But even as he said it, Thomas seemed uncertain, as if he was trying to convince himself as much as his visitors. Sarah exchanged a glance with Rodriguez. It was becoming clear that Thomas Whitfield was not fully aware of what was happening within his own company. The dementia that Dr. Vasquez had mentioned was apparently more advanced than the family wanted to admit. Mr. Whitfield, where is your son today? Sarah asked. Marcus is... He's resting. Rebecca's death has hit him very hard. They were planning to be married next spring. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. She was such a bright girl, so passionate about helping sick children. I can't understand how this could have happened. We'd like to speak with him when he's feeling up to it, Rodriguez said gently. I'll ask him, but I can't promise anything. He's barely left his room since we got the news. As they were preparing to leave, Catherine Whitfield appeared in the doorway. Sarah had to suppress a start of recognition as she studied the woman who might be a trained killer masquerading as a socialite. In person, Catherine was elegantly beautiful, with silver hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. Thomas, dear, you didn't tell me we had visitors, she said, gliding into the room with practiced grace. Detectives Chen and Rodriguez from Chicago PD, Thomas replied. They're investigating some matters related to the company. Catherine's expression remained perfectly composed, but Sarah noticed a slight tightening around her eyes. How interesting. I hope everything is in order? Just routine inquiries, Rodriguez replied diplomatically. I'm sure it is. Catherine moved to stand behind her husband's chair, placing her hands on his shoulders in what appeared to be a supportive gesture. But Sarah noticed how Thomas seemed to tense slightly at his wife's touch. Mrs. Whitfield, were you close to Rebecca Martinez? Sarah asked. Very close. She was going to be our daughter-in-law. Her death is a terrible tragedy for all of us. Catherine's voice carried exactly the right note of grief, but something about her demeanor struck Sarah as performative. Had she mentioned any concerns about her work recently? Any professional issues that might have been troubling her? Rebecca was very dedicated to her patients, perhaps too dedicated sometimes. She had a tendency to worry unnecessarily about treatment protocols and outcomes. Catherine paused. I suppose that's what made her such a good doctor, but it also caused her a great deal of stress. The implication was subtle but clear. Catherine was suggesting that Rebecca's concerns about Luminex might have been the product of an overactive imagination rather than legitimate medical issues. As they left the mansion, Sarah felt more convinced than ever that Dr. Vasquez's story was true. Thomas Whitfield was clearly not in full control of his faculties, which meant someone else was running Whitfield Pharmaceuticals. Catherine's performance had been flawless, but there had been something calculating about her responses that set off every alarm in Sarah's head. What do you think? Rodriguez asked as they drove back toward the city. I think we're dealing with people who are very good at hiding their secrets, Sarah replied. But I also think those secrets are starting to catch up with them. That evening, Sarah received another phone call from the electronically disguised voice. Detective Chen, I trust you found Dr. Vasquez's information illuminating? Who is this? Sarah demanded. Someone who wants to see justice done. Rebecca Martinez was murdered because she was getting too close to the truth about Luminex. She won't be the last to die unless someone stops Catherine Whitfield. If you have evidence of murder, you need to come forward officially. The evidence you need is in Rebecca Martinez's apartment. She was compiling her own investigation into the clinical trial irregularities. But you'll need to move quickly. Catherine Whitfield is planning to dispose of anything that might implicate her or her son. How do you know this? Because I've been watching them for a very long time. Rebecca's apartment detective. Tonight, before it's too late. The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone in frustration. Every lead in this case seemed to come from anonymous sources and shadowy figures who refused to step into the light. But if there was evidence in Rebecca Martinez's apartment that could prove she was murdered, Sarah couldn't afford to ignore the tip. She called Rodriguez and explained the situation. Within an hour, they had obtained a search warrant based on the suspicious circumstances of Rebecca's death and her connection to the Luminex investigation. The apartment was in Lincoln Park, a modest one-bedroom that reflected a young doctor's salary rather than the wealth she would have married into. What they found exceeded even Sarah's expectations. Rebecca Martinez had been conducting her own investigation into Luminex for weeks, meticulously documenting discrepancies between reported trial results and the actual outcomes she was seeing in her pediatric patients. Her files contained medical records that directly contradicted the official trial data, showing children who had suffered severe adverse reactions or died after receiving the experimental drug. Most damning was an audio recording Rebecca had made of a conversation with Marcus Whitfield just days before her death. Marcus's voice was clearly audible as he attempted to convince her to stop asking questions about Luminex. Rebecca, you're misunderstanding the situation, Marcus could be heard saying. These isolated incidents you're concerned about don't represent the overall success of the program. Sometimes individual patients have complications that aren't related to the treatment itself. Marcus, I've seen 7 children suffer severe reactions to Luminex in the past month alone, Rebecca's voice replied. That's not isolated incidents. That's a pattern. You're overreacting. The FDA has reviewed all our data and found no significant safety concerns. Because the data you submitted to the FDA doesn't match what I'm seeing in my patients. Someone is falsifying the trial results. There was a long pause before Marcus responded, and when he did, his tone had changed completely. Rebecca, I love you, but you need to drop this. There are forces at work here that you don't understand. People who won't hesitate to hurt you if you continue to interfere. Are you threatening me, Marcus? I'm trying to protect you. Please, just forget about Luminex and focus on your other patients. Our wedding is only 6 months away. Don't let professional paranoia destroy our future together. The recording ended there, but it provided clear evidence that Marcus knew about the clinical trial fraud and had been actively trying to cover it up. It also suggested that Rebecca's death might not have been accidental after all. Sarah and Rodriguez spent the rest of the night cataloging Rebecca's evidence and preparing their case. By morning, they had enough material to justify arrests and search warrants for both Marcus and Catherine Whitfield. The question was whether they could move quickly enough to prevent any more murders. At 6 a.m., Sarah's phone rang again. This time, the voice on the other end was unguised and desperate. "Detective Chen, this is Dr. Elena Vasquez. I know I said I was leaving Chicago, but I couldn't go through with it. Catherine Whitfield has my daughter." Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. "What do you mean she has your daughter?" "Sophia never came home from school yesterday. The school says a woman claiming to be her aunt picked her up early, but Sophia doesn't have any aunts. Catherine Whitfield took her, and she's using her to force me to recant everything I told you." "Dr. Vasquez, where are you now?" "I'm at a hotel downtown. Catherine called me an hour ago and told me I have until noon to publicly announce that I was mistaken about the Luminex data, that I was suffering from stress and made errors in my analysis. If I don't, Sophia will become another tragic accident." Sarah looked at the clock. It was 6:15 a.m., which gave them less than 6 hours to find an 8-year-old girl and stop a trained killer from adding another victim to her list. "Dr. Vasquez, stay where you are. We're coming to get you, and we're going to find your daughter." As Sarah grabbed her jacket and headed for the door, she realized that the case had just escalated beyond anything she had previously imagined. Catherine Whitfield was no longer content to eliminate adult threats to her family's secret. She was now willing to murder a child to protect her conspiracy. The race against time had begun, and Sarah wasn't sure they had enough hours left to save an innocent little girl from the deadly woman who had already proven she would kill anyone who stood in her way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.